I pulled into Uncle Bill's driveway, adjusting my tie in the rearview mirror one last time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his front lawn, and I could smell barbecue smoke drifting from the backyard. This was it, the pre-wedding family gathering before Danny's big day tomorrow. My stomach buzzed with excitement as I grabbed the bottle of champagne from the passenger seat, carefully chosen to celebrate my little brother's milestone moment. Walking up the familiar stone pathway, I rehearsed my best man speech one more time in my head. 28 years of brotherhood had led to this weekend, and I couldn't have been more proud. Uncle Bill opened the front door before I could knock, his weathered face carrying an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hey there, Uncle Bill," I grinned, holding up the champagne. "Can't wait for tomorrow. Danny's finally tying the knot." The color drained from his face as if I'd just told him someone had died. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, like he was struggling to find words that wouldn't come. "Fred," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. The wedding was last week. The champagne bottle slipped from my hands, shattering against the concrete steps. I stood frozen on Uncle Bill's doorstep, staring at the puddle of champagne and broken glass at my feet. The words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke that refused to become funny. Last week. The wedding was last week. My brother, my only remaining family after our parents died 3 years ago, had gotten married without telling me. "What do you mean last week?" I managed to choke out, though part of me already knew Uncle Bill wasn't the type to joke about something like this. Uncle Bill's shoulders sagged as he ushered me inside, carefully stepping around the glass. His living room felt different somehow, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The family photos on his mantel seemed to mock me. Pictures of Danny and me as kids building sandcastles, playing catch, graduating from high school together. "Sit down, son," Uncle Bill said gently, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to deliver devastating news. Danny and Sarah got married last Saturday at a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was small, maybe 30 people. The room started spinning. 30 people. My mind raced through the possibilities. Who got invited to my brother's wedding while I sat at home completely oblivious? Uncle Bill disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water, setting it on the coffee table in front of me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Danny told me the wedding was this weekend. We talked about it just 2 weeks ago. I helped him pick out his tuxedo rental." Uncle Bill's face crumpled with sympathy and something else. Guilt, maybe. He sat down across from me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Fred, I thought you knew. I thought maybe you chose not to come because of work or something. When I got the invitation, your name wasn't on it, but I figured there was some explanation." The water glass trembled in my hands as the full scope of the betrayal began to sink in. This wasn't a miscommunication or a lost invitation. This was deliberate. My brother had actively excluded me from the most important day of his life, then continued the charade by discussing wedding plans with me afterward like nothing had happened. "Who else was there?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Uncle Bill shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Aunt Martha and her kids, Cousin Jake and his wife, your dad's old business partner Tom, and his family, Sarah's parents and her sister, of course, some of their college friends." Each name hit like a physical blow. Distant relatives I saw maybe twice a year had been deemed worthy of witnessing Danny's marriage, but his own brother had been deliberately left out. The cousin who borrowed money from me last Christmas and never paid it back. The business partner who barely remembered my name at family gatherings. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened social media, something I rarely did, but suddenly felt compelled to check. Sarah's Instagram account was public, and the evidence of my exclusion was right there in high-definition color. Photo after photo of the wedding I should have been at. Danny in his tuxedo, not the one we'd looked at together, but a different one entirely. Sarah in a flowing white dress beaming as she cut a 3-tier cake. Cousin Jake giving a toast that should have been mine to give. The timestamp on the photos confirmed Uncle Bill's words. 7 days ago. While I was at work thinking about the weekend ahead and the speech I'd prepared for my brother's bachelor party, Danny was saying his vows to someone else entirely. There has to be some explanation, I said, scrolling through image after image of the celebration I'd been excluded from. Maybe Sarah's family insisted on keeping it small. Maybe they ran out of space at the venue. But even as I said the words, I knew they were lies I was telling myself to make the truth hurt less. The venue looked spacious with room for twice as many guests. And if space had truly been an issue, wouldn't a brother take priority over distant cousins and family friends? Uncle Bill reached over and gently took my phone, setting it face down on the table. Fred, I think you need to talk to Danny directly. There might be more to this story than either of us knows. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever explanation Danny might offer. How do you ask your brother why he erased you from one of the most important moments of his life? How do you have that conversation without destroying whatever relationship might be left between you? The drive home felt like moving through thick fog. Everything looked the same. The familiar streets of my neighborhood, the house I'd bought after our parents died, the mailbox I passed every day. But nothing felt real anymore. I kept thinking about the last time Danny and I had talked, just 5 days ago. He'd called to ask about borrowing my car because his was in the shop. We'd chatted for 20 minutes about work, the weather, his excitement about married life. Not once had he mentioned that he was already married, that the wedding had already happened, that I'd already been excluded from his new beginning. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone for 2 hours before finally finding the courage to call him. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Danny's cheerful voice invited me to leave a message promising he'd call back soon. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd return my call soon, but apparently hadn't thought to invite me to his wedding at all. Danny, it's Fred. I just found out about the wedding. Call me back when you get this. He didn't call back that night, or the next day, or the day after that. 3 weeks passed without a word from Danny. I'd left 4 more messages, each one shorter and more resigned than the last. I'd started to accept that maybe this was how our relationship would end, not with a fight or an argument, but with silence and the slow dissolution of 28 years of brotherhood. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was grading papers at my kitchen table. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped despite everything that had happened. Maybe he was finally ready to explain. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation I hadn't considered. Fred, hey, glad I caught you. Danny's voice was casual, warm, even as if nothing had happened between us. How have you been? I've been better, I said, carefully setting down my red pen. I left you some messages. Yeah, sorry about that. Things have been crazy with the move and getting settled into married life. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Sarah and I have a favor to ask. A favor. Not an apology, not an explanation for why I'd been excluded from his wedding, but a favor. I gripped the phone tighter, waiting for whatever was coming next. We want to celebrate our 1-month wedding anniversary, and we were hoping we could use your place up at Lake Tahoe for the weekend. Nothing big, just 20 or so close friends and family. Sarah's been dying to see the lake house, and it would mean so much to us. The audacity took my breath away. The lake house, our grandfather's property that he'd left specifically to me in his will, was Danny's solution to celebrating a marriage he'd hidden from me. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. You want to use Grandpa's house for a party? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Not a party exactly, more like an intimate celebration. Sarah's already found this amazing catering company, and her sister knows a florist who could do something really elegant with the outdoor space. We've been planning it for weeks. Planning it for weeks. While he'd been ignoring my calls and avoiding the conversation about why I wasn't at his wedding, he'd been making plans to use my property for his celebration. Danny, we need to talk about the wedding first, about why I wasn't invited. There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. When Danny came back on the line, his tone had shifted slightly, becoming more defensive. Look, Fred, I know you're upset about that, but it was Sarah's decision to keep the wedding small and drama-free. You know how you and Sarah can get when you're in the same room together. Drama-free, I repeated. Danny, I'm your brother. We had one disagreement about politics 6 months ago. It was more than just politics, and you know it. Sarah felt uncomfortable about having someone there who might create tension on our special day. She wanted everything to be perfect. The Sarah in question must have been listening to the conversation because suddenly I could hear her voice more clearly as she took the phone from Danny. Fred, hi, it's Sarah. Listen, I know this is awkward, but what's done is done. The wedding was beautiful, and Danny and I just want to focus on the future now. We're hoping you can put aside whatever hurt feelings you have and help us celebrate this milestone. Consider it a chance to make up for missing our special day. Make up for missing their special day, as if I'd chosen to miss it rather than being deliberately excluded. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. Sarah, I wasn't invited to the wedding. I didn't choose to miss it. Well, like I said, what's done is done. The question now is whether you're going to continue holding a grudge or whether you're going to be supportive family. We've already told everyone the celebration will be at your lake house, so it would be really embarrassing if we had to change venues now. And there it was. They'd already committed my property without asking permission, putting me in a position where refusing would make me look petty and vindictive to their friends and family. I could picture the story they'd tell. Poor Danny and Sarah just trying to celebrate their love, but Fred was too bitter about the wedding to let them use his lake house. You already told people it would be at my house before asking me. Danny took the phone back. We just assumed it would be okay. It's not like you ever used the place anyway, and we're family. Families help each other out. The irony was stunning. Families help each other out according to the brother who'd hidden his wedding from me. Families support each other from the man who deliberately excluded me from the most important day of his life. I need some time to think about this, I said. Fred, come on. The catering is already booked. Sarah spent hours picking out decorations. Her parents are flying in from Phoenix specifically for this. You're not seriously going to say no, are you? The pressure was immediate and intense. They'd created a situation where my refusal would inconvenience not just them, but Sarah's family and their friends. It was a masterful manipulation. Create consequences that extended beyond just the two of them, making my potential refusal seem cruel and unreasonable. I said I need time to think about it. There was another muffled conversation in the background, and when Sarah came back on the line, her voice had an edge to it that hadn't been there before. Fred, I'm going to be direct with you. This celebration means everything to Danny and me. We're asking you as family to help us mark this important milestone in our relationship. If you can't do this one small thing for us, then maybe you need to examine what kind of brother you really are. The call ended shortly after that, but the message was clear. Agree to let them use my lake house or be branded as a selfish brother who couldn't put aside his hurt feelings for the sake of family harmony. They'd positioned themselves as the reasonable ones, just asking for a simple favor, while painting me as the petty sibling who couldn't let go of past grievances. I sat in my kitchen long after the call ended, staring at the phone and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a 20-minute conversation, I'd been asked to provide a venue for celebrating a marriage I'd been excluded from, been blamed for my own exclusion, and been manipulated into a corner where refusing would make me the villain in their story. The lake house sat empty most of the year. That much was true. I'd inherited it when Grandpa died, along with the responsibility of maintaining a property I could only visit a few weekends each year. But it was more than just a house to me. It was the place where Danny and I had spent our childhood summers, where our parents had taught us to fish and build campfires and appreciate the quiet beauty of the mountains. It was the last tangible connection to our family history, and the idea of turning it into a venue for celebrating a marriage I'd been deemed unworthy to witness felt like a betrayal of everything it represented. But they'd already told people, already made commitments, already created a situation where my refusal would ripple out beyond just the three of us and affect innocent people who had nothing to do with our family drama. That night, I drove up to the lake house for the first time in months, needing to see the place and think clearly about what Danny and Sarah were asking of me. The 2-hour drive gave me time to replay the conversation and consider my options, none of which seemed particularly appealing. I spent that night at the lake house sitting on the deck and watching the moonlight reflect off the water. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was going to say no. Danny and Sarah had excluded me from their wedding, manipulated me into this position, and shown no remorse for the pain they'd caused. Using my family property to celebrate their marriage felt like adding insult to injury. But Danny wasn't finished. Over the next week, my phone rang constantly with calls from family members I rarely heard from each one, with the same basic message delivered in slightly different ways. Aunt Martha called first, her voice shaky with emotion. She was Danny's godmother and had always been protective of him even when we were kids. "Fred, honey, I heard about this little disagreement between you and Danny. I know you're hurt about the wedding situation, but you can't let that divide the family. Your parents would be heartbroken to see their boys fighting like this." Bringing our parents into it was a low blow, but effective. Aunt Martha had a gift for finding the exact emotional pressure point that would cause the most guilt. It's not about fighting Aunt Martha. It's about respect and boundaries. "Oh, sweetheart, I know Danny should have handled the wedding invitation situation better, but he's young and in love, and Sarah has very specific ideas about how she wants things done. You know how brides can be about their perfect day." Young and in love. Danny was 35 years old, not some teenager making impulsive decisions. And the suggestion that Sarah's preferences justified excluding immediate family from a wedding was absurd. But Aunt Martha had always been good at making unreasonable behavior sound perfectly rational. "The thing is," she continued, "Sarah's parents are already planning their travel. They've booked flights and taken time off work specifically for this celebration. If you don't let them use the lake house now, it's going to affect a lot of innocent people." The same argument Danny and Sarah had used, presented as if Aunt Martha had come to this conclusion independently, rather than being coached on what to say. I could practically hear the script they'd given her. Cousin Jake showed up at my house 2 days later without calling first. I opened the door to find him standing on my front porch, with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, looking uncomfortable but determined. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. Jake and I had never been particularly close. He was 5 years older and had always treated Danny and me like annoying little kids even into our 30s. The fact that he'd been invited to the wedding while I hadn't still stung, but I was curious enough about his sudden appearance to hear what he had to say. "Look, Fred, I know this whole situation is messed up. Danny should have invited you to the wedding, no question. But that ship has sailed, and now we're dealing with the aftermath." He settled onto my couch without being asked, making himself at home in a way that immediately put me on edge. "The thing is, Danny and Sarah are struggling financially right now. Sarah's student loans are crushing them, and Danny's job doesn't pay nearly enough to cover their expenses. This anniversary celebration isn't just about having a party. It's about them being able to invite their friends and family to something nice without going into debt." This was news to me. Danny worked as a software developer for a tech startup, and while it wasn't a Fortune 500 salary, it was comfortable middle-class income. Sarah worked in marketing for a non-profit organization. Combined, they should have been doing fine financially, especially with no children to support. If they're struggling with money, maybe they shouldn't be throwing an anniversary party with catering and flowers, I pointed out. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his story apparently not accounting for this obvious contradiction. "It's complicated. Sarah's parents are helping with some of the costs, but they can't cover everything. The venue is the biggest expense, and if you let them use your place, it would save them thousands of dollars they don't have. Something about Jake's explanation didn't add up, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. He seemed nervous, like he was reciting lines he'd rehearsed, rather than speaking from genuine concern for Danny's financial situation. "Why are you really here, Jake?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes directly. "Danny asked me to talk to you. He said you weren't being reasonable about the lake house, and he thought maybe hearing from someone outside the immediate situation might help you see things differently." So this wasn't Jake's idea, or his genuine concern for Danny's well-being. This was a coordinated effort to pressure me into compliance using family relationships as leverage to get what they wanted. Uncle Bill called that evening, and the conversation was the most difficult of all because I could hear the genuine conflict in his voice. Unlike Aunt Martha's emotional manipulation or Jake's rehearsed arguments, Uncle Bill sounded like someone being torn in two different directions. "Fred, I've been thinking about this situation non-stop since you found out about the wedding. I feel partially responsible because I should have realized what was happening and said something sooner. Uncle Bill, this isn't your fault. You couldn't have known they were keeping it secret from me." "Maybe not, but I could have asked more questions when I didn't see you there. I just assumed there was some explanation I wasn't aware of." There was a long pause, and I could hear Uncle Bill struggling with whatever he was going to say next. "The thing is, Danny came to see me yesterday. He said the family is being torn apart because of this anniversary celebration dispute, and he asked me to talk to you about reconsidering." Another coordinated pressure attempt, but this one felt different because Uncle Bill clearly didn't want to be making this call. He also mentioned that he'd borrowed some money from me a few months ago to help with wedding expenses, and he promised he'd pay it back after the anniversary celebration. If this event doesn't happen, I'm not sure when I'll see that money again. And there it was. Danny had borrowed money from Uncle Bill and was using the repayment as leverage to ensure I'd cooperate with the anniversary celebration plan. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. There were financial consequences for family members if I didn't comply. "How much money, Uncle Bill?" $3,000. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but with my fixed income, it's significant enough that I was counting on getting it back by the end of this month. $3,000 was definitely significant for Uncle Bill, who lived on Social Security and a small pension from his job at the post office. Danny knew that, and he'd deliberately created a situation where my refusal to provide the lake house would directly impact Uncle Bill's financial situation. "Uncle Bill, if Danny doesn't pay you back, I will. You shouldn't be caught in the middle of this because of the choices he's made." "Fred, that's very generous, but it's not your responsibility to clean up Danny's financial commitments. I just thought you should know that there are consequences beyond just your relationship with your brother." After Uncle Bill hung up, I sat in my kitchen trying to process the scope of what Danny and Sarah had orchestrated. They'd created a web of financial and emotional obligations that extended throughout our extended family, making my refusal to provide the lake house a decision that would hurt innocent people who had nothing to do with the original conflict. It was brilliant manipulation, really. They'd positioned themselves as the victims of my unreasonable stubbornness, while simultaneously creating real consequences that would affect Uncle Bill's financial security, Aunt Martha's emotional well-being, and the travel plans of Sarah's family. But it was also a revelation about who Danny had become, or maybe who he'd always been, but I'd been too blind to see clearly. The brother I thought I knew would never have leveraged family relationships this way. The Danny I remembered would have been horrified at the idea of using Uncle Bill's financial vulnerability as a tool to get what he wanted. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to react to Danny and Sarah's pressure campaign, I was going to take control of the situation and find out exactly what I was dealing with. If my brother had become someone capable of this level of manipulation, I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I made any decisions about the lake house or our relationship moving forward. The next morning, I did something I'd never imagined I'd need to do regarding my own brother. I hired a private investigator. The decision felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. But the inconsistencies in the stories I'd been told were eating at me. Danny claiming financial struggles while throwing an expensive anniversary celebration. Sarah's family flying in from Phoenix for a 1-month anniversary party. Jake's nervous demeanor when explaining Danny's supposed money problems. The investigator I hired was a middle-aged woman named Linda Rodriguez, who specialized in background checks and financial investigations. She had a no-nonsense attitude and 20 years of experience, and she listened to my story without judgment or surprise, as if families hiring her to investigate their own relatives was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning occurrence. I need to understand what I'm really dealing with, I explained to her in her small office downtown. The stories aren't adding up, and I'm being pressured to make decisions based on information that might not be true. Linda nodded and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Financial records, social media presence, public records, employment verification. Should take about a week to get a comprehensive picture. What's your budget for this? A week felt like forever when family members were calling me daily to pressure me into providing the lake house. But I needed facts, not emotions and manipulation. The preliminary results came back in 5 days, and they were stunning. Linda called me at 7 in the morning, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd uncovered something significant. Fred, you need to see this in person. Can you come to my office this morning? An hour later, I sat across from Linda as she laid out a series of documents that painted a completely different picture of Danny and Sarah's life than the one they'd been presenting to me and our family. Your brother and his wife aren't struggling financially, Linda said, pointing to bank statements she'd obtained through public record searches. Their combined annual income is $112,000, which is well above the median for their age group in this area. She slid another document across the desk. Sarah's father owns 3 successful auto dealerships in the Phoenix area. His net worth is approximately $2.4 million. According to the wedding vendor receipts I was able to track down, he paid for the entire wedding, which cost just over $80,000. $80,000 for a 30-person wedding. That was nearly 3 times what the average American wedding cost, hardly the intimate budget-conscious affair Danny had described. But here's where it gets interesting. Linda continued, pulling out a thick folder. I found the gift registry from their wedding, and it includes over $50,000 worth of items. According to the completion records, 90% of the registry was fulfilled. $50,000 in wedding gifts, plus an $80,000 wedding paid for by Sarah's father, plus their substantial combined income. The picture of financial struggle they'd painted for the family was completely fabricated. There's more, Linda said, her expression growing more serious. I ran a background check on Sarah, and this isn't her first serious relationship. She was engaged 3 years ago to a man named Marcus Chen in Denver. She handed me a printed email thread that made my blood run cold. Marcus's brother contacted me after he saw my inquiries in the public records. He wanted to share his experience because he recognized the pattern. The emails detailed a story that was eerily similar to what I was experiencing. Sarah had systematically isolated Marcus from his family over the course of 18 months. She'd manufactured conflicts with his siblings, convinced him that his parents disapproved of their relationship, and gradually created a situation where Marcus felt he had to choose between Sarah and his family. According to Marcus's brother, she intercepted phone calls and text messages, deleted emails, and told elaborate lies about what family members had said about Marcus. By the time they got engaged, Marcus had stopped speaking to most of his family because he believed they were trying to sabotage his relationship. The engagement ended when Marcus discovered Sarah had been lying about a family emergency to prevent him from attending his grandfather's funeral. When he confronted her about the deception, she became verbally abusive and threatened to harm herself if he left her. Marcus ended the relationship and spent months rebuilding the family connections she'd destroyed. I think you need to see this, Linda said, handing me another document. Phone records for your brother's number over the past 6 months. The records showed dozens of incoming calls and texts from my number that had apparently never reached Danny. According to the phone company's records, calls from my number to Danny's had been automatically forwarded to a secondary number, Sarah's phone, for the past 4 months. She's been intercepting your communications, Linda explained. Your brother probably has no idea you've been trying to reach him. From his perspective, you've been radio silent since the wedding, which would support whatever story she's been telling him about your reaction. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Sarah had been systematically cutting Danny off from his family while making it appear that we were the ones rejecting him. Every call I'd made, every text I'd sent, had been redirected to her phone instead of reaching my brother. Danny probably believed I was angry and refusing to communicate, while I believed he was ignoring my attempts to reconcile. There's one more thing, Linda said, pulling out a final document. I found the venue booking for their anniversary celebration. It's not at your lake house. They've had a reservation at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay for the past month. The deposit was paid by Sarah's father. I stared at the reservation confirmation, trying to process what this meant. They'd never needed my lake house for their celebration. They already had a venue booked at one of the most expensive hotels in Northern California. The entire pressure campaign had been about something else entirely. Why would they lie about needing the lake house if they already have a venue? I asked. Linda leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Based on what I've learned about Sarah's previous relationship pattern, I'd guess this is about isolation. She wants to create a situation where you either comply with an unreasonable request, making you complicit in your own marginalization, or refuse, and appear unreasonable to the rest of your family. Either outcome serves her goal of separating your brother from his support system. The manipulation was so sophisticated it was almost impressive. If I agreed to provide the lake house, I'd be enabling Sarah's control over Danny and validating the lies she'd told about our family's financial situation. If I refused, I'd appear petty and vindictive, further justifying Danny's separation from his family in his own mind. What do I do with this information? I asked Linda. That's up to you, she said. But in my experience, the people being manipulated usually want to know the truth, even if they're not ready to accept it initially. The question is whether you think your brother is still reachable, or whether she's already succeeded in turning him against his family completely. I left Linda's office with a folder full of evidence and a decision to make that felt impossible. How do you tell someone they're being manipulated by the person they love most? How do you present evidence of deception without seeming like the jealous brother who can't accept his siblings' happiness? But I also knew I couldn't let Sarah continue to destroy Danny's family relationships while he remained unaware of what was happening. The brother I'd grown up with was still in there somewhere, and he deserved to know the truth about what his wife was doing to the people who loved him. That evening, I called Danny's work number, bypassing Sarah's phone interception system for the first time in months. When he answered, he sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me. Fred, how did you get this number? Danny, we need to talk. In person. There are things you need to know. There was a pause, and I could hear office sounds in the background. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the normal sounds of a workplace that felt completely surreal given the conversation we were about to have. Is this about the lake house? Because Sarah said you've been really unreasonable about the whole thing. Sarah said, everything Danny believed about my reaction, my communications, my unwillingness to participate in their celebration was based on what Sarah had told him rather than any direct interaction between us. It's about more than the lake house, I said. Danny, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I've called, I've texted, I've left messages. Have you gotten any of those? Another pause, longer this time. No, I haven't gotten any messages from you. I figured you were too angry to talk. I'm going to send you an address. Can you meet me tomorrow evening? Come alone. Don't tell Sarah where you're going or who you're meeting with. Fred, that sounds really paranoid. Why can't Sarah know I'm talking to my own brother? Because she's been lying to both of us for months, I thought. Because she's destroyed a family in Denver, and she's working on destroying ours. Because everything you believe about our family and our relationship is based on deception. But I couldn't say any of that over the phone. Danny needed to see the evidence, and he needed to hear the truth in an environment where Sarah couldn't control or manipulate the conversation. Danny, I'm asking you to trust me one more time. Meet me tomorrow night and I'll explain everything. After that, you can make whatever decisions you want about our relationship and the lake house and everything else. But you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening. There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought he was going to refuse. Then he sighed, sounding tired and confused. Okay, send me the address. But Fred, whatever you think you know about Sarah or our marriage, you're probably wrong. I love her and she loves me. She's not the villain in this story. After he hung up, I sat in my car in Linda's parking lot, holding the folder of evidence and hoping I was making the right choice. Tomorrow night, I was going to show my brother proof that the woman he loved had been systematically destroying his family relationships. I was going to present evidence that everything he believed about our recent history was based on lies and manipulation. I was either going to save my brother from a destructive relationship, or I was going to lose him forever. Either way, after tomorrow night, nothing would ever be the same between us again. After my conversation with Danny, I spent the entire night developing a plan that felt both necessary and terrifying. Simply presenting him with Linda's evidence wouldn't be enough. Sarah had spent months conditioning him to distrust his family's motives, and any direct confrontation would likely be dismissed as jealousy or manipulation on my part. I needed a strategy that would allow the truth to reveal itself naturally in a way that Danny couldn't deny or rationalize away. The next morning, I called Sarah directly for the first time since their phone call about the lake house. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and artificially cheerful. Fred, what a nice surprise. I hope you're calling with good news about the anniversary celebration. Actually, I am, I said, forcing warmth into my voice. I've been thinking about what you and Danny said, and you're right. Family should support each other, and I don't want to be the reason your celebration doesn't happen. There was a pause, as if Sarah was trying to determine whether this was genuine or some kind of trap. That's wonderful, Fred. I knew you'd come around once you had time to think about it rationally. The condescension in her voice was barely concealed, but I pressed forward with my plan. There are just a few conditions, family traditions really, that come with using the lake house. Grandpa was very specific about how the property should be used for family celebrations. Of course, Sarah said quickly. We want to honor your grandfather's memory. What kind of traditions? Well, there's a guest book that everyone who uses the house for special occasions has to sign. It's been in our family for 60 years, and Grandpa always insisted that guests write about what the gesture meant to them, how it felt to be welcomed into the family property. This was complete fabrication, but Sarah had no way of knowing that. I was betting on her narcissism and her need to control the narrative about their relationship with my family. That sounds lovely, she said. Very meaningful. And traditionally, the family member who provides the house gives a toast during the celebration, sharing memories and welcoming new family members. It's just something we've always done. Another lie, but one that would give me an opportunity to address their guests directly without appearing to ambush Sarah and Danny. The other thing, I continued, is that Grandpa always insisted the house be properly secured during events. There have been some break-ins in the area recently, so I'd want to activate the security system during your celebration. The cameras record everything, but it's just for safety and insurance purposes. Sarah agreed to all of these conditions without hesitation, probably because she was focused on getting access to the property and didn't consider how these traditions might complicate her plans. There is one other thing, I added. The family usually contributes something meaningful to these celebrations. I'd like to put together a slideshow of family memories to show during the evening, if that's okay. Pictures of Danny growing up, our parents, that kind of thing. I think your guests would enjoy seeing the family history. That sounds perfect, Sarah said. Danny will love that. After ending the call, I contacted Linda and arranged for her to attend the celebration as a catering supervisor. With her investigative background, she'd be perfectly positioned to document whatever unfolded during the evening. I also reached out to Uncle Bill, Aunt Martha, and Cousin Jake, inviting them to attend what I described as a family reconciliation celebration. None of them knew about the evidence I'd gathered, but I wanted witnesses to whatever was going to happen. The most challenging part of my plan was creating the slideshow Sarah had agreed to. I spent hours going through family photos, but interspersed between the innocent childhood pictures and family vacation memories, I included screenshots of the evidence Linda had gathered. Bank statements showing their actual financial situation, copies of the intercepted phone records, documentation of the Ritz-Carlton reservation they'd been hiding, photos and details from Marcus's brother about Sarah's previous relationship pattern. I also included a recording I'd made of my conversation with Marcus himself. Linda had arranged for me to speak with him directly, and he'd agreed to share his experience with Sarah's manipulation tactics. His story was heartbreaking and familiar. A man who'd lost his family relationships because he'd trusted someone who was systematically destroying them. The slideshow was designed to look like a normal family presentation for the first 10 minutes, lulling the audience into thinking they were watching harmless nostalgia. Then the evidence would begin appearing gradually at first, then building to an overwhelming documentation of Sarah's deception and manipulation. Danny met me the evening before the anniversary celebration as we'd arranged. I'd chosen a quiet restaurant where we could talk without interruption, but I didn't plan to present any evidence that night. Instead, I wanted to plant seeds of doubt and encourage him to pay attention to things he might have been overlooking. "I'm glad you decided to let us use the lake house," Danny said after we'd ordered our food. "Sarah was worried you were too angry about the wedding to ever forgive us." "Danny, have you been getting my phone calls and messages over the past few months?" He looked confused by the question. "No, like I said, I figured you were too upset to want to talk. Sarah said she thought you needed space to process your feelings about the wedding situation," Sarah said. Again, everything Danny believed about my reaction was filtered through Sarah's interpretation rather than direct communication between us. "What if I told you I've been calling and texting you regularly trying to reach you to talk about what happened?" Danny's expression shifted slightly, the first hint of doubt I'd seen from him in months. "That's impossible. I would have gotten those messages." "Would you? When's the last time you checked your phone settings to see if anything had been changed?" He pulled out his phone, his movements becoming less confident. "I don't really mess with the technical stuff. Sarah handles most of that because she's better with technology." Sarah handles most of that. Of course she did. I watched Danny scroll through his phone settings, his confusion growing, as he encountered configurations he didn't remember setting up. "Danny, tomorrow night during the celebration, I want you to pay attention to how Sarah reacts to certain things. Watch her face when family members talk about their relationships with you. Notice whether the stories she's told you about our family match what you observe directly." "Fred, you're starting to sound paranoid. Sarah isn't some master manipulator. She's my wife and she loves me. I'm sure she does love you in her way. But love and control aren't the same thing, and sometimes people who love us still make choices that hurt us or the people we care about." Danny left the restaurant that night looking troubled, though I wasn't sure if that was because of what I'd said or because he was dreading having to report our conversation to Sarah. Either way, the seeds of doubt had been planted, and tomorrow night's celebration would either help them grow or kill them completely. I spent the rest of that evening making final preparations for what I'd started thinking of as the most important family gathering of my life. Everything I'd learned about Sarah's manipulation tactics suggested that she was most dangerous when she felt cornered or exposed. Tomorrow night was going to corner her completely, and I had no idea how she was going to react when her carefully constructed web of lies began unraveling in front of an audience. But Danny deserved to know the truth about what had been happening to his family relationships, and our extended family deserved to understand how they'd been manipulated into pressuring me. Whatever happened tomorrow night, at least everyone would finally be operating with accurate information instead of Sarah's carefully crafted deceptions. I fell asleep that night, thinking about our grandfather and the lake house that had brought our family together for so many celebrations over the years. Tomorrow, it was either going to heal the wounds Sarah had created, or it was going to be the place where our family finally broke apart completely. Either way, the truth was finally going to come to light. The day of Sarah and Danny's anniversary celebration dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect Lake Tahoe weather that made the mountains look like a postcard. I arrived at the lake house 3 hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive, wanting time to set up the slideshow equipment and coordinate with Linda, who had arrived early in her role as catering supervisor. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Linda asked, as we tested the projection system in the living room. "Once you start that slideshow, there's no taking it back. Your relationship with your brother is going to change permanently, one way or another." I nodded, though my hands were shaking slightly as I connected the laptop to the projector. Danny deserves to know the truth. Whatever happens after that is his choice to make. The caterers arrived first, followed by the florist Sarah had hired to decorate the outdoor deck space. Everything was elegant and expensive, exactly the kind of celebration you'd expect from people with substantial financial resources, not the struggling couple Sarah had described to our family. Uncle Bill arrived early, looking uncomfortable in his best suit, and carrying a wrapped gift that I knew represented a significant expense for someone on his limited income. Aunt Martha came with Cousin Jake and his wife, all of them chattering nervously about the family reconciliation they thought they were attending. "Fred, honey, I'm so proud of you for doing this," Aunt Martha said, pulling me aside as the other guests began arriving. "I know it took a lot of maturity to put aside your hurt feelings and support Danny's marriage." I nodded and smiled, not trusting myself to speak. In a few hours, Aunt Martha would understand exactly how she'd been manipulated into participating in this pressure campaign, and I wasn't sure how she was going to react to learning the truth. Sarah and Danny arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that seemed designed to emphasize their status as the guests of honor. Sarah wore a flowing white dress that looked expensive and bridal, while Danny was in a suit I'd never seen before. They looked happy and confident, the picture of a successful couple celebrating their love. "Fred," Sarah said, embracing me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Thank you so much for this. The house looks absolutely magical." "Danny," I said, shaking my brother's hand, "I'm glad we could make this work." But when I looked into Danny's eyes, I could see something that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty, maybe even suspicion. Our conversation the previous night had clearly affected him, and he was paying attention to things he might have previously ignored. The celebration began with cocktails on the deck, and I watched the family dynamics unfold with new understanding. Sarah dominated every conversation, subtly steering discussions away from topics that might remind Danny of positive family memories. When Uncle Bill mentioned a fishing trip he'd taken with Danny and me 2 summers ago, Sarah quickly changed the subject to their honeymoon plans. When Cousin Jake started telling a funny story about Danny's college years, Sarah interrupted with a comment about how much Danny had matured since then. It was masterful social manipulation, so smooth that most people wouldn't even notice it was happening. But Danny was noticing now, his expression growing more troubled as the evening progressed. Dinner was served at 7, and I stood to offer the traditional toast I'd told Sarah about. The guests quieted down, expecting a typical family welcome speech. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Danny and Sarah's marriage." I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Family is the most important thing we have, and it means everything to me that we could all come together like this." I paused, looking around at the faces of people I'd known my entire life. People who'd been manipulated into believing I was the problem in this family conflict. Before we continue with the celebration, I'd like to share some family memories with you all. I put together a slideshow of pictures and moments that show how important Danny has always been to our family. Sarah beamed, clearly pleased with what she thought was going to be a sentimental presentation that would reinforce the family harmony narrative she'd been crafting. The slideshow began innocently enough. Photos of Danny and me as children building sandcastles and riding bikes. Pictures from family vacations, Christmas mornings, high school graduations. The guests smiled and murmured appreciatively, enjoying the nostalgic journey through our shared history. Then the first piece of evidence appeared on the screen. A bank statement showing Danny and Sarah's actual financial situation, their comfortable six-figure combined income highlighted in yellow. "That's interesting," I said conversationally. "It looks like Danny and Sarah are doing quite well financially, despite what some of us were told about their struggles." Sarah's face went white, but she recovered quickly. "Fred, what is this? Why are you showing private financial information?" "Because our family was told that Danny needed our help due to financial hardship. Uncle Bill was asked to loan money based on that claim. It seemed important for everyone to know the truth." The next slide showed the receipts from their $80,000 wedding paid for by Sarah's father. Then came the documentation of their $50,000 gift registry, 90% of which had been fulfilled. Danny stared at the screen, his confusion evident. "Sarah, you told me we needed to keep the wedding small because we couldn't afford anything bigger." "We did need to keep it small," Sarah said quickly. "Just because my father helped doesn't mean we're wealthy." But the next slide showed Sarah's father's net worth and business holdings, followed by documentation of the Ritz-Carlton reservation they'd hidden from everyone. "You already have a venue booked for tonight," I announced to the room. "A reservation that's been in place for a month, paid for by Sarah's father. This celebration was never about needing my lake house." The room erupted in confused murmurs as family members tried to process what they were seeing. But the most damning evidence was still to come. The phone records appeared on screen, next showing months of intercepted calls and messages between Danny and me. Every attempt I'd made to contact my brother, every message I'd left trying to reconcile after the wedding, had been diverted to Sarah's phone. "Danny," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You haven't been getting my calls because Sarah has been intercepting them. For 4 months she's been cutting off communication between us, while telling you I was too angry to reach out." Danny turned to stare at his wife, his face a mixture of shock and growing anger. "Sarah, is this true?" "It's not what it looks like," Sarah said, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I was trying to protect you from his negativity. He was saying horrible things about me, about our marriage." "Show them the recording!" "Fred," Linda called out from the back of the room, her cover as catering supervisor now irrelevant. The slideshow continued with audio from my conversation with Marcus, Sarah's previous fiancé. His voice filled the room as he described the identical pattern of isolation and manipulation he'd experienced, the systematic destruction of his family relationships, the lies and intercepted communications. "She told me my family was trying to sabotage our relationship," Marcus's voice explained. "She convinced me that they were jealous of my happiness and wanted to break us up. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd lost contact with almost everyone I cared about." Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward. "This is insane. You hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. You're the one who's manipulative, Fred. You're trying to destroy my marriage because you can't stand that Danny chose me over his family." But the evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in the room could see the pattern clearly now. The financial lies, the communication interception, the systematic isolation tactics, the previous relationship, where she'd exhibited identical behavior. Danny stood up slowly, his face pale, but his voice steady. "Sarah, I need you to explain this. All of it. The phone calls, the lies about money, the wedding invitation list. I need to understand what's been happening." "What's been happening?" Sarah snapped her mask, finally slipping completely. "Is that your family has been trying to come between us since the day we got engaged. Your brother is jealous because he's alone and bitter, and he can't stand seeing you happy. I've been trying to call him for months, Danny said quietly. Every week, sometimes more. I thought he was ignoring me. Because I was protecting you from his toxic influence, Sarah shot back. You're too trusting, Danny. You don't see how manipulative your family can be. My family. Danny's voice was getting louder now, his confusion turning to anger. Sarah, you lied about our finances to get money from Uncle Bill. You intercepted my communications with my brother. You excluded him from our wedding and then tried to manipulate him into providing a venue for a celebration you'd already booked somewhere else. The room was completely silent, except for Sarah's increasingly desperate attempts to explain away the evidence. But with each word, she revealed more of her true nature. Manipulative, controlling, and utterly without remorse for the pain she'd caused. Fine, she said finally, her voice turning cold and vicious. You want to know the truth? Your family is a bunch of small-minded, ordinary people who were holding you back. I was trying to help you become the person you're capable of being, instead of settling for their mediocre expectations. She turned to face the room, her composure completely gone now. You all act like you care about Danny, but where were you when he was struggling in college? Where were you when he was trying to start his career? I'm the one who encouraged him to reach for more, to expect better from life. Sarah, stop, Danny said, but she was beyond stopping now. Fred is jealous because he's stuck in this dead-end teaching job while Danny has a real career. Uncle Bill is bitter because his own family fell apart. Aunt Martha is lonely and wants to live through other people's relationships. None of you have ever truly supported Danny's dreams. The cruelty in her voice was shocking, but it was also revelatory. This was who Sarah really was when she wasn't carefully managing her image and manipulating people's perceptions. This was the person my brother had married without ever really knowing her true nature. Danny stood up, his decision clear in his posture and expression. Sarah, we're leaving. Now. And when we get home, we need to have a very long conversation about our marriage and whether it can survive what I've learned tonight. Don't you dare blame me for this, Sarah hissed. Your family set this up to humiliate me. They never wanted our marriage to succeed. My family wanted me to be happy, Danny said firmly. And they were trying to protect me from someone who was systematically destroying my relationships with the people who love me. Sarah stormed out of the lake house, leaving Danny to face the room full of family members who'd finally seen the truth about what had been happening to their family dynamics. The silence that followed her departure was heavy with shock and understanding. Danny turned to me, his eyes filled with tears and regret. Fred, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to begin to make up for what happened, but I want to try. And for the first time in months, I believed that my brother was truly back. 3 months have passed since that night at the lake house, and the transformation in our family has been remarkable. Danny and Sarah divorced 6 weeks after the anniversary celebration that never happened at the Ritz-Carlton. The divorce was swift and uncontested. Once Danny understood the full scope of Sarah's manipulation, he wanted nothing more than to extricate himself from the relationship as quickly and completely as possible. The days immediately following the revelation were some of the most difficult of Danny's life. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town and began seeing a therapist who specializes in recovery from manipulative relationships. The process of understanding how thoroughly he'd been deceived was painful and humbling, but necessary for his healing. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. Danny told me during one of our weekly dinners, a tradition we'd reestablished as part of rebuilding our relationship. The way she always had an explanation for why family gatherings were inconvenient, how she managed all my communications, the way she reframed every conflict to make our family seem unreasonable. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the therapist Danny had been working with, explained to both of us how sophisticated psychological manipulation works. People like Sarah are experts at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities, she said during a joint session Danny had asked me to attend. They isolate their targets gradually, so subtly that the victim doesn't realize what's happening until the process is nearly complete. Understanding the psychology behind Sarah's behavior helped Danny forgive himself for falling victim to her tactics, but it also made him more determined to rebuild the relationships she'd damaged. The first step was making amends with our extended family, particularly Uncle Bill, who had been financially manipulated into the pressure campaign. Danny paid back the $3,000 Uncle Bill had loaned him plus interest within a week of the divorce filing. But more importantly, he sat down with Uncle Bill and took full responsibility for allowing his wife to use Uncle Bill's financial vulnerability as leverage. "I should have questioned why Sarah knew about your loan," Danny said during their conversation. "I should have realized that using your financial situation to pressure Fred was manipulative and wrong. I'm sorry I let that happen." Uncle Bill, true to his generous nature, forgave Danny immediately. "You were being manipulated too, son. The important thing is that you recognized what was happening and chose to make it right." The reconciliation with Aunt Martha was more complicated because she'd been the most emotionally invested in pressuring me to comply with Sarah's demands. Learning that she'd been manipulated into participating in a campaign designed to isolate Danny from his family hit her particularly hard. "I feel like such a fool," she told me tearfully during a family dinner at her house. "I was so focused on keeping the family together that I didn't see I was actually helping someone tear it apart." "Aunt Martha Sarah is a professional manipulator," I replied. "She's destroyed families before ours, and she knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to get the reactions she wanted. You were trying to protect Danny's happiness. That's not foolish. It's loving." Cousin Jake's reaction was perhaps the most interesting because it revealed how much guilt he'd been carrying about his role in the pressure campaign. He admitted that he'd known something felt wrong about the story Sarah and Danny had told him, but he'd pushed aside his doubts because confronting them would have been uncomfortable. "I should have asked more questions," Jake said during a family barbecue we held to celebrate Danny's new apartment. "I should have trusted my instincts when the financial story didn't add up. Instead, I just went along with what they asked me to do." "We all made mistakes," Danny replied. "The important thing is that we learned from them and that our family survived Sarah's attempts to destroy it." The healing process wasn't just about forgiveness and reconciliation, though. It was also about establishing new boundaries and communication patterns that would prevent similar manipulation from succeeding in the future. Danny and I implemented a rule that all important family communications would be direct, without spouses or partners acting as intermediaries. We also agreed to trust our instincts when something felt off about family dynamics, rather than dismissing concerns to keep the peace. Linda Rodriguez, the private investigator who'd helped uncover the truth about Sarah's behavior, became an unexpected friend during this process. Her professional expertise in recognizing manipulation tactics helped our family understand not just what had happened, but how to protect ourselves from similar situations in the future. The most important thing, Linda told us during a family meeting, is to maintain direct relationships with each other. Manipulators thrive when they can control information flow and interpretation. When family members communicate directly and regularly, it becomes much harder for someone to create the kind of isolation Sarah achieved. Danny's recovery from the marriage has been steady and encouraging. The therapy has helped him understand not just how he was manipulated, but why he was vulnerable to that manipulation in the first place. Growing up without our parents for most of his adult life had created an emotional need for the kind of intense, exclusive relationship Sarah offered, but he's learned to distinguish between healthy intimacy and controlling behavior. I thought love meant wanting to spend all your time with someone and prioritizing their needs above everything else. Danny explained to me during one of our fishing trips to the lake house. Sarah convinced me that a good husband puts his wife's comfort above his family's feelings, and that seemed romantic and mature at the time. Love should enhance your other relationships, not replace them. I replied, thinking about the lesson our parents had tried to teach us before they died. The right person for you will want you to have strong family connections because those relationships make you happier and more complete. The lake house has become central to our family's healing process. We've established a new tradition of monthly gatherings there, open to all family members, and designed to strengthen the connections Sarah had worked so hard to weaken. Uncle Bill has become the unofficial coordinator of these events, using his organizational skills and genuine love for bringing people together. Your grandfather would be proud, Uncle Bill told me during our most recent gathering. He always said this place was meant to bring families together during difficult times. Danny has also used the lake house as a place for personal reflection and growth. He spends weekends there alone, sometimes processing what happened to him and planning for his future. The solitude helps him distinguish between his own thoughts and desires and the preferences Sarah had gradually imposed on him during their relationship. I'm remembering who I was before I met her, Danny told me after one of these solo retreats. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed reading or how peaceful I found hiking in the mountains. Sarah always preferred indoor activities and cultural events in the city, and gradually I stopped doing the things I actually enjoyed. The most significant change in Danny's perspective has been his understanding of what healthy boundaries look like in relationships. Dr. Walsh helped him see that Sarah's behavior wasn't just manipulative. It was also a sign of her own psychological instability and inability to form genuine connections with others. People who truly love you want you to maintain your independence and your other relationships, Dr. Walsh explained. They don't try to become your entire world because they understand that's not healthy for either person in the relationship. As for my own growth through this experience, I've learned the importance of trusting my instincts about people and situations, even when those instincts make me uncomfortable or go against what others are telling me. The pressure campaign our family mounted to convince me to provide the lake house was effective because it appealed to my desire to be seen as a good brother and family member. But giving in to that pressure would have enabled Sarah's manipulation and validated her tactics. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's destructive pattern. I've come to understand. Saying no to unreasonable demands isn't selfish. It's often the only way to protect the people you care about from their own poor choices. The experience has also taught me about the difference between forgiveness and enabling. I forgave Danny for his role in excluding me from his wedding and pressuring me about the lake house. But that forgiveness came with clear boundaries about how I expected to be treated moving forward. Healthy forgiveness includes both understanding and accountability. Today, Danny and I have dinner together every Tuesday evening, alternating between his apartment and my house. We talk about everything: work, relationships, family, our plans for the future. The easy communication we'd shared as children has returned, but it's deeper now, informed by adult understanding of how precious and fragile family relationships can be. I almost lost you, Danny said to me recently as we watched the sunset from his apartment balcony. I almost let someone convince me that my own brother was the enemy. I can't believe how close I came to destroying the most important relationship in my life. But you didn't, I reminded him. When it mattered most, when you had to choose between believing what someone was telling you and trusting what you could see with your own eyes, you chose to see the truth. That's what saved our relationship. Looking back on this entire experience, I'm struck by how much our family has grown stronger through surviving Sarah's attempts to destroy it. We communicate more directly, now trust each other more completely, and value our connections more deeply because we've seen how easily they can be threatened. Uncle Bill has become more assertive about expressing his opinions and concerns rather than trying to keep peace by staying neutral in family conflicts. Aunt Martha has developed better boundaries around her desire to fix other people's problems, understanding that sometimes helping means stepping back rather than getting more involved. Cousin Jake has learned to trust his instincts and ask difficult questions when something doesn't feel right, rather than going along to avoid confrontation. As for me, I've gained confidence in my ability to protect what matters most to me, even when that protection requires difficult choices and uncomfortable confrontations. The lake house remains a symbol of our family's resilience and our commitment to each other, but it's no longer just a place we visit. It's become a reminder of what we're willing to fight for when our relationships are threatened. Danny is dating someone new now, a teacher named Amanda, who works at a school in the next district over from mine. Their relationship is completely different from his marriage to Sarah, open, honest, and inclusive of family and friends. Amanda encourages Danny's relationship with our family and often joins our Tuesday dinners or weekend gatherings at the lake house. The difference is night and day. Danny told me after introducing Amanda to the family. Amanda asks about my family, wants to hear funny stories about our childhood, encourages me to maintain my friendships and hobbies. Being with her makes me feel more like myself, not less. The contrast with Sarah's behavior is striking and instructive. Healthy relationships enhance your connection to the people and activities that make you happy, while manipulative relationships gradually isolate you from everything except the manipulator. As I finish telling this story, I'm sitting on the deck of the lake house, watching Danny and Amanda teach Uncle Bill how to use his new fishing rod, while Aunt Martha and Cousin Jake prepare dinner in the kitchen. The sounds of family laughter and conversation fill the evening air, and I'm reminded of all the celebrations this place has hosted over the years. The anniversary celebration Sarah and Danny had planned never happened, but we've created something better. A tradition of regular gatherings that celebrate not just milestones and achievements, but the simple fact that we chose to fight for each other when our relationships were threatened. The most important lesson I've learned from this experience is that love sometimes requires saying no to the people we care about. Refusing to enable Danny's exclusion of me from his wedding, declining to provide the lake house for their manipulative celebration, and insisting on direct communication, despite family pressure, were all acts of love disguised as acts of refusal. Sometimes protecting the people we care about means refusing to participate in their destructive choices, even when that refusal makes us temporarily unpopular or misunderstood. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is maintain our boundaries and insist on healthy relationship patterns, even when doing so creates conflict or discomfort. But most importantly, this experience taught me that family relationships are worth fighting for, even when that fight is difficult and painful. Danny and I could have allowed Sarah's manipulation to destroy our brotherhood permanently. Our extended family could have remained divided by the lies and pressure tactics she employed. Instead, we chose to do the hard work of uncovering the truth and rebuilding what had been damaged. The lake house will host many more celebrations in the years to come. But none will be more meaningful than the regular gatherings where we simply enjoy each other's company and remember how much our family connections mean to all of us. We've learned not to take those connections for granted, and we've developed the tools and boundaries necessary to protect them from future threats. As the evening light fades over Lake Tahoe and our family prepares for another evening of stories and laughter, I'm grateful for every difficult moment that led us to this place. We're stronger now, wiser, and more committed to each other than we were before Sarah tried to tear us apart. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives us is the opportunity to discover just how much we're willing to sacrifice to protect what matters most. For our family, that gift came wrapped in betrayal and manipulation, but it revealed the depth of our love for each other and our commitment to staying connected no matter what challenges we face. That's a lesson worth sharing and a truth worth fighting for no matter how difficult the battle becomes. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your boundaries with family? Sometimes the hardest thing about loving someone is refusing to enable their destructive choices, even when saying no makes you look like the bad guy. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family dynamics and how you've handled situations where someone tried to manipulate your relationships. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and standing up for what's right, and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you protect and strengthen the relationships that matter most in your own life.